at the height of your career, all of a sudden, visitors from Washington appear in Hollywood, and the House Un-American Activities Committee sort of swoops in. You can tell where this audience is coming from. And you were actually a participant in, I'm going to let you tell the story, but one of the most remarkable plane trips ever taken, really. I always say that if that Hollywood Fights Back charter flight to Washington to the hearings, if that plane had dropped an engine, Hollywood history would have been entirely rewritten because there were so many amazing people on that airplane. I've set it up. Take it away, Marsha.
What to tell about it? I think there were probably several hundred familiar names and faces who would have liked to be on our flight. Hollywood was under attack, and there was a congressional committee called the House Committee on Un-American Activities, which found that it could get itself headlines by accusing Hollywood of being masterminded by communists, and that it was really maybe dangerous to go to the movies, that your patriotism might be subverted, because there were a lot of Reds writing screenplays and maybe directing them, maybe acting in them. And that was what was happening in 1947, was that 19 very gifted writers and directors and one actor were subpoenaed to come to Washington and account for their political beliefs. But we have a secret ballot, I understood. I thought that was one of the things we were promised. And so just on principle, we objected to that. People had a right to be communists. It was a perfectly legal political party at the time. And so for it to be made a hazard to your career, and a dirtier word than murder or rape, I mean, if you were a commie, watch out. And for that reason, Hollywood stood up and said, stop this. We meaning the industry, gave those 19 a send-off meeting at the biggest auditorium in town, the Shrine, seated I think 6,000 or 7,000 movie makers. They came from every studio as the send-off to the Hollywood 19. And those of us who went on a flight were simply those who were free and not shooting at the time, but our plane was paid for by the nickels and dimes and dollars of movie-making people. And we passed the hat. Howard Hughes, hardly a communist, offered us a plane, one of his many planes, to fly back to Washington. And
maybe that was the one that was supposed to drop the engine.
He was not allowed to give it. We had to pay full price, so we passed the hat. The industry paid for chartering a flight, and there were 30-some of us on the flight. And of course it was led by the Bogarts, and I would say Danny Kaye was probably the other big. But there
John Huston, Billy Wilder.
John Huston was among the 3 directors who thought up that trip. See, the headlines were scaring Americans to death, that maybe it wasn't safe to go to the movies anymore. Their loyalty might be subverted by hidden commie propaganda tucked away in the dialogue. And this was such nonsense that it had to be answered. But the headlines were very large, and the committee, which included Richard Nixon, he was on that committee. Yeah. They had to be answered. They were getting headlines every day on the strength of attacking Hollywood. So this was fighting fire with fire, headlines with headlines. Anyhow, we flew to Washington to accentuate the positive. We stopped along the way, 2 or 3 stops, Kansas City, and I think, I don't know, Philadelphia, St. Louis, I don't know. We stopped 2 or 3 times on the way there, and 2 or 3 other stops on the way back. And, you know, the word was out about our flight, and the flying field was packed with citizens. And they didn't care about communism or hearings. They wanted to see the Bogarts, and they wanted to see all those movie stars. So we spoke to the public that thronged these flying fields at every stop and explained our mission, that it was pretty hard to subvert Americans' loyalty without being caught at it. And that if there were communists who wanted to get some propaganda tucked away, there are too many cooks making that soup of a movie. And all the way from the head of the studio to the editor and the director and the producer and the sneak previews, all those things. You couldn't get away with tricking Americans into loving communism. And we had to speak plainly about that, which we did along the way, and we did in Washington. And we attended 2 days of hearings of the Hollywood 19, as they were called, these really gifted men. And we were misquoted, we were ridiculed by some of the press. The rest of the press thought we were doing a dandy job of showing the other side of things. Anyway, by the time we got back to Hollywood, the hearings had been called off, and we thought maybe we had made a difference. Maybe really we had been able to even the score of scaring the public to death about going to the movies, whether they would be subverted and their loyalty somehow masterminded away. But then there was a meeting at the Waldorf Astoria held of all the studio heads, and that's where it hit the fan. That is where we lost the war. Because the people who provided the funds for movies said, we are pulling our backing for your studios if you don't get rid of every one of these Hollywood 19 who have been subpoenaed as unfriendly witnesses. They had already heard some friendly ones. Get rid of them. Get rid not only of the Hollywood 19, get rid of anybody who seems in any way to be making waves. This is money at the box office, and we can't lose it. And so the Hollywood 19 was summarily fired, and we who had spoken up to defend their political freedom were also suspect.